Hola, how's everyone doing? So, see if anyone joins the stream here. So, gang, I just hope everyone's doing okay with coping, like however you're coping. Personally, I'm just focusing on taking care of myself, exercise and eating well and all that stuff, and then I hope that I can take care of my family and all the rest of it. So we'll all get through this shortly. So I don't want to get too sidetracked with the virus or anything like that. Let's just focus on some sewing and having some fun. So I will record this as a standalone video. So anyone who wants to watch it again or wasn't able to participate in this initial one here, you can watch it on your own time. Alrighty, so I don't know where everyone's coming at with sewing, so I'll take this first one quite basic. The first video here, gang, will probably be 40 minutes, something like that. Basically get squared away on our machines, how to set them up, needles, thread, all that good stuff. And maybe have some time to get into a few basic seams. And then on the next one, the next lesson tomorrow or sometime on the weekend, we will get to make our own lunch bag together. So I'll give you guys some homework so that we can all be ready for that on the next one. Okay, so and you guys can give me a feedback here after this first one. I'm sure I'm going to have some technical stuff to work on, and also from the sewing side of things, if I'm going too slow on stuff and you're like, yeah, we got that. Let's move on to some more technical stuff. I'm happy to do whatever you guys want. So first one here, as I say, about 40 minutes, give or take. We'll get squared away on our sewing machines, and then we'll be set up to actually do some more projects on the next one. Yeah, I didn't do any intros there, but I'm Neil. This is Alpine Threadworks. I don't have any actual official sewing training, so some of the terms and everything I use might not be correct. But I've been sewing professionally for around 18 years, something like that. So this is sewing as I understand it. And a little warning: I have zero experience sewing with like cotton and all that stuff. So all my experience is from more outdoor type fabrics. I'll do my best to relate it to for those who may be sewing with cotton and stuff. Okay, let's just get into it. I'm gonna switch it. Here's my ghetto chest mount. Gonna switch to the chest mount here. Okay, so I'm working on an industrial machine, and my assumption is that all you guys are going to be on home sewing machines, which is totally fine. So some of the features are going to cosmetically look a little different on your machines, but the function is the same. So if you have any issues about, well, that doesn't look like it does on my machine, you can just ask the Google for your particular machine, and you guys are all smart. You'll sort it out. So let's just go through a few basic things here, gang. First off, your presser foot. I'm embarrassed to show how dirty my floor is. Mine's pretty big here. Yours will range from a simple little push button, but you in some way have some sort of presser foot. You've got some sort of a forward and back on your machine. Stitch length, we'll get into that when we start sewing, but basically that's adjusting how spread out or how close your stitches are. tension adjust. This we will get into here in some detail to make sure everyone's machine is set up properly. But first off, just with anatomy, that's our tension adjust for our upper thread. Probably won't get into adjusting your presser foot tension too much, but that's what that is. There's basically a huge spring inside here that is pushing down on your presser foot. And your presser foot is the little feet here that push down on the fabric. All your levers will look differently. Some of you guys will have a lever up front, but in some way you have a way of lifting your presser foot. Some of you guys may have a fancy knee bar like I do here, and you can lift your presser foot with the knee bar. Okay, and then working over this way, everyone's going to have some sort of bobbin winder, and I'm not going to get into how mine works because it's different than yours, it's different than his, it's different than hers. They're all slightly different in terms of their function. Once again, you can ask the Google how your particular machine works, but it's going to wind up your bobbins with thread. And the bobbins are what go underneath, and so they form the bottom thread. And we'll get into how to install that in one sec here. So what kind of thread are we putting on our sewing machines? Once again, I sew stuff that has to last outside, and you know, if you're into making a cotton a purse or handbag or something, that's totally cool, and you can sew with cotton thread. That's no worries. If you do want stuff to be used outside or be a little bit stronger, or even just, you know, like a shopping bag or something, which we might get into making, and it's going to have some moisture and stuff on it. So this isn't focusing very well here. Anyways, I would highly recommend polyester thread or nylon thread. Those are going to be a lot stronger. You can get cotton thread, and as I said, I don't know the implications of sewing if you're sewing on cotton with polyester or nylon, like if the cotton shrinks in the sewing machine and your thread doesn't. I don't understand that. That's something you can research. But in terms of strength, which is what I'm worried about, nylon or polyester is the winner. And oh, there we go. It's focusing. Gutermann is a really, really high quality polyester thread, and you'll be able to find that in your local sewing shop. And just look there on for 100% polyester or nylon. Okay, and then it's also very important that your needle matches the thickness of the thread. And I won't nerd out on this too much, but you can ask your local sewing shop when you're buying stuff. So it's kind of like if you're drilling a hole in wood and you want to put a bolt in that wood, you're obviously not going to drill a huge, massive hole and put a tiny, tiny little a bolt on in it. That's not going to work too well. On the flip side, if you drill a teeny, tiny little hole and try and put a big bolt in it, that's not going to work very well either. So the thickness or the gauge of your needle, it's basically how fat it is, how thick it is. That is dictated by two things: the thickness of a material that you're working with, and also the thickness of thread. So when I'm sewing on my big heavyweight nylon thread here, I have a big old thick needle to go along with it, and the thick thread can fit through the thicker eye hole. When I'm sewing on lighter weight thread, like when I make the ski guide rescue tarps, I'm sewing on a much skinnier needle. It's not making as big of a hole, and the eye where the thread goes in is much smaller as well. Okay, so we're going to match our thread with the thickness of our needle. And then the other measurement on the needle is how physically long it is. And that is purely what your machine needs. So whether I have a thick fat needle or I have a thin needle, it is always the exact same height. And that's just something that you can read or research for your given sewing machine. Okay, so that's our thread. And right now I've got a heavyweight nylon in here. That's just what I was working with last, so we'll leave it as that. Whatever you've got on your machine currently will be fine, and you can have some homework to sort this out. Okay, so we have our top thread. We have also our bottom thread, and this is our bobbin. And some of you guys, mine loads in from the side. Some of you guys might load in from the front. Some of them top load. It doesn't matter, but they're all going to look like this. If your machine is from 1920 or your machine is from 2020, it looks like this. And so you get your bobbin all filled with thread off your bobbin winder. And how we want to load this guy is have the thread doing a 6. So that would not be a 6. That would be a backwards 6. So we want to get our thread oriented here so that we have a 6. And our bobbin case. And with our bobbin and thread coming off in a 6 pattern, we just plunk her in there. And there is a little groove here where the thread goes through, and you'll feel and hear a clunk when the thread's in place. And then on our bobbin case here, is that focusing? Not too bad, hey? There's 2 screws here on your bobbin case. This one is physically attaching the tension adjuster thing onto the bobbin. And this one here, the other one, that is the tension in terms of how much force it takes to pull the thread out. And these are just little turns. Like 1/8 of a turn is a big adjustment. So if I were to righty-tighty this one, that would put more tension on my bobbin thread. If I were to lefty-loosey this, that would remove tension. And a good general ballpark to start your bobbin tension is if you can just do sort of a yo-yo motion. It's kind of hard here. I can see that thread getting longer. Just a little yo-yo motion, and it sort of just lets some thread out when I do that yo-yo motion. That's a good starting point for bobbin tension. So if I were to do that a yo-yo and it completely drops to the floor, well, I'm going to have to righty-tighty that screw. Or if I like bang, bang, bang away and my bobbin's not dropping, it's too tight, and I would have to lefty-loosey that bobbin tension. Okay, so we got our bobbin in there. We're laughing. I trim off this extra thread. And if you just hold this guy open, this lever up, that sort of locks the bobbin in place, and so it can't come out. And that's how you slide it into your machine. So I'm just going to reach under here and do that. Okay. So each year machines will have a slightly different way of threading the thread in. So I won't get too bogged down in the details here. You can Google or YouTube like how to thread whatever model your machine is. This is a part on your machine, once again, that almost all sewing machines in the world, this is pretty universal, how the tension thing works. And the first way you go into this is just into these two, in between these two discs. And if it's hard to get the thread in there, one thing to remember that if your presser foot is down, let me zoom in here, then your tension is locked in. And if you lift your presser foot up, it removes the tension. So it's easy to thread your machine with your presser foot up. Okay, so let's do that. So through in between these two discs, and coming around and hooking this little, you can see that metal thing there underneath, and then through the top one. So once again, I won't spend a whole lot of time on that because each machine here will have slightly different threading ways. And one thing that is very important is making sure your needle is in correctly. A lot of machines will have some sort of special shape to the needle, and then a female receiving area in the machine that it only lets you put the needle in the correct way. Some of your machines like mine, this is just round, and I can put this needle in any way I want. Let me try and focus. Come on, focus. Okay, so I'm not sure if you guys can see that, but one side of your needle is relatively flat, and that side right there, you can see right there glinting in the light, there's a groove or a channel on one side of the needle. That channel is for the thread to go in, and it's very, very, very important that we get our needle in the right way. So that channel or that groove has to be facing your bobbin. So if your bobbin loaded in from the front of your machine, you'd want the groove on the needle facing the front of your machine. My bobbin loads in from the side, so I make sure I have that groove or that channel in the needle facing the bobbin. Okay, so we've done that. Wonderful. Now when I put the thread into the needle, I want to make sure I'm doing so where I'm starting at the side of the needle that has that channel. And therefore the thread can go inside that channel and it won't get cut, etc. Okay. So then to grab or get your bobbin thread from underneath, I'll just do a rotation and cycle the machine through one cycle. And you want to stop. Let me see here. There we go. One cycle is from this little guy at the top, going down and coming back up to the top. And now you can see I've hooked my bobbin thread underneath. So I've got these different colors just so you guys can see them here. I've got red underneath and I've got black on top, just so you guys can see what's going on there. Okay, so let's start sewing. Blast this guy on here. If I'm going too fast or I'm going too slow, I have the chat system engaged there, gang. So please say something. I can back up. I can speed up here. So first thing we want to do is make sure that our tension is correct. So we have tension adjust here, and we have tension adjust on our bobbin, like we've learned. And what's happening on a lock stitch machine is the top thread and the bottom thread basically get twisted up inside the material. And if your top tension is too tight, then it wins the war and it pulls up the bobbin thread, and you see all these loops on the top. or if the bobbin tension is too tight, it pulls it on the underside, and you want them just balanced. So let's see here. Do you guys see? I can see the red of the bobbin thread showing up on the top. So that means the top tension is too tight, or the bottom tension is too loose. It's allowing the bobbin threads to come up to the top. And generally speaking, I always try and adjust this problem just by using the upper tension. Do that sort of a yo-yo test for your bobbin, and generally speaking, I'll just leave that alone. I haven't changed my bobbin tension in years, literally. Okay, so here's our upper tension, so I need to loosen that off a little bit. Okay, let's try it again here. Still a little bit of red showing through. Still a little bit. Okay. There we go. So there, some pretty good tension. We got red on the bottom, and we got black on top. Awesome. And here's what we started with. Come on, focus. You can see the red bobbin thread being really pulled up to the top. Okay, so that was pretty simple. And sometimes you'll have to adjust this, like if you sew on one type of material and switch to another, you might have to change your tension a little bit. Okay, so we've got our bobbin winder. We've got our forward and back. We know top tension, we know bottom tension, we know how to load our bobbin by making sure our bobbin thread comes off, making a 6, and then plunking it in our bobbin. We know to grab our bobbin thread from underneath. We just manually with our hand cycle our machine through a full cycle, and this guy ending back up on top. Okay, awesome. So let's just do some basic sewing here, gang. First off, you want to start and end each line of sewing by doing a forward and back. If I just blast along here sewing like I did originally when we were testing our bobbin, this can just pull out because it's not locked in place. So when we start sewing, I got my hand on the forward and back, and just do 3 or 4 stitches forward and back, and then you're ready to sew. And then 3 or 4 stitches at the end when you're done, and that locks things in place. And when you're done sewing and you want to pull the material out, manually rotate this thing. This always is going to move towards you, always, always, always. And rotate until, once again, sorry for this technical stuff here, this guy is up at the top. Wonderful. Then you can pull your material out. Okay, awesome. The other thing to consider here, gang, is your stitch length. Simply put, having more or closer together stitches is going to make for a stronger seam. Let me get you here. I'm going to blab for a little bit. So it's going to make a stronger seam up until the point where you start to affect the integrity of the material. So take, for example, like webbing on webbing. Say like you're a climbing harness, and you look at the belay rappel loop on a climbing harness. the number of stitches in there is quite astronomical, and it makes a really strong system because both materials can handle that amount of needle holes in it. But if I like just a pepper, an extremely lightweight fabric full of needle holes, yeah, it's literally just going to tear in half. So there's no real answer on what stitch length is strongest, but generally speaking, with stronger materials, you can go with a closer stitch length because materials can handle on those needle holes. Also, if you're using a really thin needle, all things being equal, you can have a closer stitch length with a skinny needle because you're not physically putting as big of a hole. And when you're sewing with a big needle, all things being equal, you kind of have to have a bit longer stitch length because the needle is just doing such physical damage every time it goes into the material. So there's no real magical answer there on what is right. And you can just do some testing. Like if you like to nerd out on this stuff, you can sew a couple seams with stitch length X, a couple seams with stitch length Y, and do some strength testing. Like, I could attach a 10-pound weight to it, drop it from the rafters, and see what breaks quicker. And so on my little stitch length dial, I'll just show an example here. So that's the longest that it can go. And then I'll put it all the way down. So what I got here, the longest my machine can do here is about 2 stitches in 1 centimeter. And the skinniest it can do here is, oh man, I can't even count those, probably 10 stitches in 1 centimeter. And I'm usually kind of around when I'm making backpacks and stuff. So I haven't actually measured that. Let's see what I'm at here. When I'm making packs and outdoor gear in 1 centimeter, I'm at 1, 2, 3, around 3 stitches per centimeter. And I will change that. Like when I go to a really skinny needle, like on the Ski Guide Rescue tarps, I'm sewing it in lighter weight fabric, but I have a really skinny needle, I might increase that a little bit. If I'm doing a webbing on webbing sewing, then I will reduce that stitch length and have more stitches because the material can handle it, and it'll make a stronger seam. Okay, so stitch length, types of needle, types of thread, forward and back when we start, forward and back when we end. Okay. Oh yeah, another thing is do some reading for your particular machine. Lubricating your machine is very, very important, but it's also important to do it correctly. So some of my machines, maybe I'll do a little shop tour on another episode, but yeah, I have 8 sewing machines. And some of them I have a physical bottle of oil where I need to drop it in certain places on the machine. On this particular one, it just sits in a big old bath of oil, and it's an automatic lubricator, and so I don't have to do a single thing except change the oil every couple months. So do some reading on your particular machine and make sure that you're lubricating it as you should. Okay. How are we doing, gang? Everyone's good? Okay, so let's do a real basic seam here. Sorry, excuse me, I'm just getting some scraps ready here. So every fabric is going to have a good side and a bad side. In outdoor fabric, it's pretty easy. The bad side is the part with the waterproofing. And if you're working with cottons and stuff, it's a little bit harder to tell, but basically the good side has the colors are more vibrant. You'll be able to figure it out. So our first most basic seam, and I use this seam in 99 out of 100 situations where I'm sewing during the day, is, and please excuse you technical sewers out there for the term, but just a simple good side to good side seam. So I figured out the good side on this fabric and the good side on this fabric, and I'm putting those good sides together, and I'm gonna sew them together. As you're getting into sewing and maybe doing some of your own designing, which we will do on this series, you guys are gonna help redesign this lunch bag for next episode, and we're going to redesign this because I'm sure you guys don't have Velcro laying around at home and you don't have binding tape laying around at home. So we're going to redesign this to make a lunch bag where all you need is just a piece of fabric. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. It's important that you kind of choose what seam allowance you're going to sew with. And if you're buying a kit or some sort of pattern, it will tell you what the seam allowance is. And the seam allowance is basically from where your needle goes in, how much leftover fabric do you have? I use 1.5 centimeters. And there's pros and cons to using a bigger seam allowance or less. With outdoor fabrics, they can unravel, and we'll get into that a little bit with when we do binding. But as they wear, on this woven fabric can unravel. And so if you're sewing right up against the edge and the fabric unravels, if those unravels meet the stitches, kaboom, your seam is going to blow apart. And so that's why you want a little bit of extra fabric here. If you go too crazy, then you're just going to have all this bulk inside whatever item you're making. So, okay, so I used 1.5 centimeters, and some people will have a physical drawing on the base of their sewing machine, as in they can guide their fabric up to that, either a felt pen, or some people put some tape there. And honestly, I just eyeball it. I don't know if I've ever actually had a guide. I just wing it. I mean, that's not the best way. Okay. So good sides to good sides, figure out what your seam allowance is, and forward and back to start here. And let me trim this so it makes a bit more sense. Okay. And blast through to the end, forward and back at the end. Then when we're done sewing, we manually rotate towards us, and we make sure we manually rotate until the needle is up, and also this thing is up, and that's how the end of the cycle. And the bobbin is positioned such that we can pull everything out. Lift up our presser foot, and we can pull this out. Trim your threads, and you have just made a good side to good side seam. Ta-da! Nice. Awesome. And that's that. So we can progress from this, and we'll save a little of this for next time. Where are we at here? 34 minutes. We can do a lot of things here. We can finish this edge with binding tape so that it doesn't unravel and it looks all nice and professional. I will save that for next time. What we will do right now is then you can now top stitch this. And top stitching it, a few benefits here is one, it makes it lay flat. You're getting an extra row of stitching in there, and it basically makes it stronger. Now, in some situations, when you're making a product, you can top stitch, and in some situations you can't. So for example, here's one of my performance satchels, and when I sewed this zipper in, I did exactly what I just did. Zipper and fabric, good sides together, sewed them together, flipped it over, top stitched, and there we go. However, when I then sewed all these panels together, I did good side to a good side, but just the nature of now I have a whole circular bag, and there's no way I can top stitch that just because I can't, like how to get that under my machine. You're going to just sew the bag closed. What happens with a Velcro? And so some situations you just can't top stitch, and that's how it is. And so if you couldn't top stitch and you wanted a stronger seam, you could just do another row of stitching there. Anyways, we'll get into that a little more next time. And then top stitching, fold the one side over, and I'm pulling these apart nice and snug. Press your foot down, forward and back. And my 5-year-old daughter always yells at me, "Daddy, you're gonna sew your fingers." It's okay, sweetie, I'm not gonna. And then always get in the habit of just lining up the edge of your presser foot with something in order to stay straight and have a nice straight stitch. I find if you look at your actual needle, it's kind of like staring at snow in your windshield when you're driving during a winter storm. You kind of get mesmerized a little bit. So I usually just stare at the edge of my presser foot and make sure I'm lining that up with my seam. And forward and back at the end. Again, rotate manually this thing forward until the needle is up and this thing is up. Okay, now we have a good side to good side, a top stitched seam. And we can see now that I'm sewing on 2 layers of fabric, my bobbin tension needs a little bit, or sorry, my overall tension needs a little bit of adjusting here. The black from the top side is getting sucked down underneath. Just a little increase in tension. And once again, you would definitely want to be using the same color thread top and bottom. I've just done different colors so you guys can see bobbin versus top thread. And I've just used a black here, a black thread, but you again absolutely want to match the thread color to whatever fabric you're sewing. Yeah, if you're doing contrasting thread, you bloody well better make sure that you're keeping things straight, because there's no room for hiding matched thread with fabric. And if your stitches are wavering a little bit, it's not the end of the world. It's not quite as obvious. Okay, so I don't want anyone to get left behind here, gang. So what we're going to do is a little bit of homework. So everyone get comfortable winding your bobbins, and you can have a few bobbins at your ready. Have some thread that you want to work with. Make sure that our needle is in correctly. Once again, with the grooved side of the needle facing your bobbin. Remember how to put our bobbin in correctly. We want our thread coming off like a 6, and then just put your bobbin down there, and with the thread coming off in a 6, just plunk it in, pulling that until it sort of slots into space. Remember our yo-yo test here. You should just be able to give a hard drop and a little bit of thread comes out. And goof around with stitch length, goof around with your tension, make sure that it's balanced. The threads are sort of just hiding in the middle of the fabric. I'll get comfortable going forwards and backwards. Get some sort of guide on your base plate here for a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. And then last but not least, for tomorrow, gang. Sorry, this thing isn't. Knock your heart out, GoPro. As I say, as a team, next time we're going to redesign this lunch bag so that you guys can all make it, and all you need is a piece of fabric. And your piece of fabric has to be approximately, let's say we have a 50 centimeter long by, let's go 25 centimeter wide chunk of fabric. So for you Americans, somewhere around 8 inches wide, and let's go 20 inches long. If you have some piece of fabric, it can be a pillowcase, whatever, blue jeans, doesn't matter, something you can make a lunch bag out of, and we'll take it next time. I'll probably do Instagram, you know, those voting things in your story, how you can vote on stuff in terms of what time works for you guys, like morning, afternoon, or maybe evening after supper, so that we can all get a time that works for us. Thanks, guys. I'll work through some, I know that was pretty ghetto on my end, but I'll work through some stuff on my end. You guys can do your homework, and I'll see you guys next time. Ciao. Now the awkward part where I try to end the stream, but I'm still staring at you. Take care of yourselves, guys. Ciao.